thank Lee for this wonderful graphic. It was so much better than my initial introductory slide. I thought I've got to borrow that for the introduction. I'm going to do this in two parts because I think it's actually wise to keep the content is dense all the time with the law of one, and it's better, wiser to maybe keep each presentation to about an hour. That would give us another hour for discussion or to go on to other things, and then allow us to digest it. And so the part one will be what we're going to look at here as far as the history and purpose of the veil, why, where, how it came about, and why. And then next month we'll do part two, which will be how to penetrate the veil and what the process is for that and why that's important. So I think it's important that we understand the context of, from Ra's point of view, the law of one's point of view, why there is even a veil, and what's the whole point of that. So this will be kind of a two-part, which I think maybe is a better way to do it than trying to cram it all into one presentation. So today we're going to look at these things: history of the veil and third density. What was it like, or what was going on before the veil or the forgetting? That means in third density, polarization, and what the process of polarization was before the veil, and now how it's been impacted by the fact that we're veiled. Motivation, problems, and graduation, and that was one of the motivations, or one of the reasons for the experiment with the veil that proved to be successful, and what all that was about, and how it impacted free will and the choice process in third density, what investment means to polarity, not only in this density but the others. And then there'll be some so about 10 key points in summary, sums up what the veil is, and kind of our understanding of it. So that's the process I want to get through in the next hour. Okay with that? Yep.
Yeah, okay.
So let's start going into it, reading from the law of one and stopping and maybe discussing key points as we go. And again, I do encourage you to ask questions between each slide if they come up, so that we can ask them why they're present-minded. Whereas this then becomes more of an interactive discussion than just a presentation, because for me, I think that's preferable. I believe from the feedback that works better for most of you as well. So we're going to look at a couple of sections that are key to this. This is section 72, and I think sorry, 82, and the next one will be a lot out of, I think it's 77, if I remember right, but we'll see that in a minute. And it's important for you guys to note these, because if you want to go in and look at the actual quotes or verses, if you like to call them that, the readings in the context that they were given, it might frame it in another way for you, because I pull the ones out that are pertinent, but certainly there's information prior to this and subsequent to each of these that also help frame it. We just can't put everything in. So Raya is answering a question. He says, the first beings of mind, body, and spirit were not complex. That's an important point. The veil is what has caused us to be called mind, body, spirit complexes. And let's see if he explains why. But initially, before there was a veil in third density, we were called mind, body, spirits. So there's an interesting, subtle difference there that is very profound as far as what our experience is in Earth life. So that small first sentence has a great deal of depth to impact in how we experience this human density. He goes on, the experience of mind, body, spirits at the beginning of the octave of experience was singular. There was no third density forgetting. There was no veil. The lessons of third density are predestined by the very nature of the of vibratory rates experienced during this particular density, and by the nature of the quantum jump to the vibratory experience of fourth density. So the other thing implied there, and we'll get clarity on this later on, is there really wasn't a choice as much as there is now. Your life path was predestined, which is very interesting. So that's how it was originally laid out. No veil, predestined sort of lessons that you would take, and you just sort of wander through those as you liked. It was is kind of what's implied here. So we're looking at, and what happens in graduation is you change your vibratory rate. And that's what he's referring to here. The nature of the vibratory rates experienced during that particular density, and by the nature of the jump to the fourth density vibratory rate. So that was what was it about. There was some problems, though, with that original setup. So in our octave, he's saying, it's how it was originally designed. Now, another thing to keep in mind, and we're going to get into this a little bit more, but the designers of each octave are what he calls the logi. And that refers directly to the suns or stars, if you like, in each galaxy. These are intelligent beings that have a great deal of wisdom and knowledge and connection. And so they're what, when we see the word logi, you can replace it with the word sun, meaning sun or star within the system of our galaxy. Okay, so there's some context there, but we'll cover that again as it comes up. So then Don starts asking, well, am I correct then in assuming that the first mind-body spirit experiences as this galaxy progressed in growth were those that moved through the densities, that is, the process we have discussed coming out of second densities, again, the octaves or the seven levels, right? The seven notes in an octave, the seven colors in a rainbow. That's what we're referring to here, back to some other presentations. The process we have discussed coming out of second density. Remember, second density is the density of animal and plant life. For instance, let us take a particular planet, one of the very early planets formed in the center of the galaxy. And they make that distinction too. The planets in the galaxy and the system of sort of delegation happen from the center outwards. It's interesting to note that we exist on the outer rim of our galaxy, right? So there's much, much older planets and stars in the inner center part. That's just how galaxies tend to evolve. That's what that's referring to. I will assume that the planet solidified in first density, that life appeared in second density, and all of the mind, body, spirit complexes, he shouldn't have said complexes because that's not what they were then, but again, this is Don asking, of third density progressed out of second density and that planet and on that planet and evolved in third density. Is that correct? That's hypothetically correct. I mean, Ra's not going to correct everything, and he probably would have wanted to correct that they weren't complexes at that point, but we can just stipulate that. So yeah, that's kind of the theory of how it happened. In other words, there was a general evolution from first to second into third, etc. It's just people or the entities, beings, if you like, of intelligent infinity, beings of awareness growing in their awareness through the densities. So again, these are following through, right? 812, 813. Now we jump a bit because they sort of talk off script a little bit. Then he comes back in 816, 8216, sorry. Since there was no forgetting, since the mind, body, spirit complexes had the consciousness in what we call physical incarnation, they knew the same thing that they would know not in the physical incarnation. So he's asking a question about, so they were living in third density, but they knew what we know when we die and the veil's taken away. They weren't veiled. So he says, what was the mechanism for teaching that taught this? The ways of love in the third density physical prior to the forgetting process. So how did they grow and learn? Because they already had the memory of that. So what was the process there? So Ra says your query seems to be pursuing the possibility that the mechanisms of experience in third density are different in a mind body spirit if a mind body spirit is attempting them rather than a mind body spirit complex. In other words, was it his implication in the question is that it must have been different the way that they learned in third density before the veil than it was after. So that's Ra's reframing the question. The nature of third density is constant. Its ways are to be learned the same now and forever. Thusly, no matter what form the entity facing these lessons, the lessons and mechanisms are the same. And so that's going into a little bit of the depth of the design of the octave system and what has to sort of happen in each one to inspire, enable growth to the point that they can jump into the next one from second to third, from third to fourth. So he's talking about what were the lessons different in that, and Ra's basically saying no, they've always been the same. They're a constant in the universe. Any questions about that yet? We're sort of just laying some groundwork for understanding. Well, then what was the point of the veil, and what was it? What problem were they solving by introducing something like veiling us? And so this is a little bit muddled at first. But are there any questions about anything written in that part of the section?
Yes, Lou.
Thanks, Lee and Scott. Hello, everyone. Yeah, 8212, the first one. Just clarifying, the first beings of mind, body, and spirit. Is that referring to the first beings in the third density in the first creation?
Yeah, it is. Mind, body, and spirit beings are always third density or human formed type beings. They actually don't call them mind, body, spirit in second density. There's an interesting discussion that they actually get the spirit side gets added in. They're a mind body in second, but not, they become a mind, body, spirit in third. And it was the beginning of this octave is what Ra is referring to. He's not speaking about all octaves, but certainly this one that we're in.
1 second. Do you mean this one we are in at this very moment, or the very first one?
This one that we're in at this very moment. But it followed the pattern of many others because all of the sons learn from each other instantly because they're all connected to the one. Again, they're all part of the one creator. The sons or the logi are the first intelligent offspring of the original creator, and they're given license to be creators themselves. So it's interesting that the Egyptians worship the sun as their god, and Ra was associated in Egypt as a sun god. There's some actual profound insight and truth into that because our sun does actually set a lot of the parameters for life in this particular solar system. And the center sun, which will be at the center of the Milky Way galaxy, is the key logos that sets the parameters for all of the what they call sub logo, which is Ra's name for our sun. It sets the parameters for them, but gives them freedom to choose and how to set up the rules, if you like, of nature, etc., of evolution, of growth within their own domain. So the power of free choice of how it's created is passed down, but they draw upon the one infinite creator's wisdom through eons of experience of what's the ideal or best learned way so far of how to do this. And that's where we're starting at kind of looking at the very beginning of how this whole system of octaves and growth became invented, if you like, or developed.
So then that means that happens the same in each octave. In each octave, regardless, on the first beings that happens on the third density for the first beings in each octave.
Yes,
It's like each octave they start from zero, from scratch.
no, in a sense, one sense yes, in one sense no. They set it up the same way. All the octaves are set up very similar, but they have enough nuance in them that each galaxy can have its own kind of way of setting it up. For example, our galaxy is known as having a lot more of a compassionate, merciful approach to learning and growth and forgiveness, which is interesting. Whereas some other galaxies might be more regimented into the disciplines of justice instead of so much more in the mercy.
Okay,
Yeah.
good. I
So
got
there's
it.
nuances to it. Yeah.
Okay, good. Thanks.
Judy, did you have a question?
Well, I did, but I think that Scott may have answered it. I was just curious about the choice. You know, choice is very important in this density, isn't it? And
Yes.
if everything is known, and everything is sort of arranged and organized on the other ones, when there's no veil, do people still have a choice? I think you're saying that they do, but what they choose from is not the same kind of polarity as we have to make choices from in this density. Is that right?
Yes, we're going to get into that in quite a lot of detail in a few slides, Judy. So
okay.
let's see if it answers it then, but if it doesn't, bring it up again there because we've got some information on that I think will clarify that. It's a good question.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Scott. That's
Okay.
it.
Okay. So history of the veil versus with regards to polarization. So Don asks, let's move that up a little bit. The prior, then again, this is in 82 as well. Prior to the forgetting process, so before that happened, there was no concept of anything but service to others, polarization. What sort of societies, experiences, and third density were created and evolved in that condition? Right. So there wasn't service to self, service to others, polarization. It was just service, really. It was just because everybody knew that they were connected and united, they were one. That's not something they didn't know about. The reason we don't know about that now is because of the veil. So that's why this is important. The veil is what caused that sense of separateness. Before the veil, there wasn't a sense of separateness. So there's no service to self or service to others. It's really just service to the one infinite creator of which we all are a part is more of how it was set up. Right. So it is our perception that that such conditions created the situation of a most pallid experiential nexus in which lessons were garnered with the related speed of the turtle to the cheetah. So what he's saying there is in those conditions, people progressed very slow. In fact, we find that third density became the longest density. People had to keep reincarnating and coming back over and over and over again. And that was the problem. It was the longest, millions and millions of years in third density because people just sort of hung out. They weren't motivated. And so therein was still their choice, right? They still had the choice. There just wasn't a motivation to do the work that would enable them to polarize enough to get into fourth density. So Don's going to talk more about that, and that'll come up over and over again. He asks, did such societies evolve with technologies of a complex nature, or were they quite simple? Can you give me a general idea of the evolution that would be a function of what we would call intellectual activity? Raz says there is infinite diversity in societies under that 60%. So in other words, there was any number of ways they evolved from simple to quite technological. That which even the most highly sophisticated, in your terms, societies structure lacked, given the non-complex nature of its entities, was what you would call will, or to use a more plebeian term, gusto. or Elaine Vital, sorry. In other words, motivation. They were kind of apathetic and lazy about putting forth the work to grow. They knew about it. They knew about the other densities. Again, there was no veil. It was like being at the beach at a party the whole time. Um, why go back to school and do the hard work when you can just hang out and have a lot of fun? It's kind of another analogy that sort of comes to mind, and that comes up a bit later, I think. So that was what was wrong. There was many, many different levels of evolution and sophistication, but what they lacked was the entities was a what you might call will to or motivation to self-improvement. Okay. So then Don asks, then even though from our point of view, there was great evolutionary experience in what it was deemed at some point by the evolving logos, sons, that an experiment to create a greater experience was appropriate. Is that correct? So they saw this, they saw the problem of people's apathy, the sons and their wisdom. And again, you're talking about very highly intelligent entities in their own right. Um, said this, we need to do something to fix this third density problem. We're getting kind of stalled in third density. And that's what Don is asking. Ra says that's correct, and may benefit from maybe comments. The logos, sons, and the logos, when he says it this way, is what he usually terms the central sun for our galaxy. So if we're talking about our galaxy, we can talk about that as a specific entity or being. The logos is aware of the nature of third density requirements for what you have called graduation. Okay, there's requirements set at every density to graduate into the next one. And that's what he's meaning before when he says it's always set. There's a standard, right? It's not like the modern educational system where they've dropped all the standard and everybody gets a prize. that's not how eternity works. You've really got to meet the standard to go to the next level. You don't just sort of show up and camp out there or squat there. That's not how the universe allows it to work. And so that's what he's talking about here. They're aware of the nature of third density requirements for graduation. All the previous, if you would use this term, experiments, although resulting in many experiences, lacked what was considered the critical ingredient, and that is polarization. There was little enough tendency for experience to polarize entities, that entities repeated habitually the third density cycle many times over. So there's where he's saying what I paraphrased before. They just kept coming back. It was desired that the potential for polarization be made more available. And that's why they created the idea of the veil, to see if that would be a means to increase the potential for polarization. Questions about that? Nope.
Nope, not so far.
Okay, good. Oh. Now my slide's locked up. There we go. So we go on, 8222. So again, we're going through section 82, almost the whole thing that's pertinent to this. Don asks, then, since the only possibility at this particular time, as I see it, was a polarization for service to others, or just service, but essentially that would be the correct way of saying it. That was the original concept, is that you would grow in service to the one, which is everybody, not just the me one, right? I must assume from what you said that even though all were aware of this service to others necessary, they were unable to achieve it. They weren't able to achieve the sufficient amount required to graduate, is what he's saying. What was the configuration of mind, body, and spirit complexes? He shouldn't say complexes, but this is Don. At that time, were they aware of the necessity for the polarization or unaware of it? And if so, why did they have such a difficult time serving others to the extent necessary for graduation, since this was the only polarity possible. So he's asking several questions there around that. Let's see what Raz says. And here's where he gives that little analogy. Consider, if you will, the tendency of those who are divinely happy, as you call this distortion, to have little urge to alter or better their condition. Such is the result of the mind, body, spirit. Notice Ra doesn't say complex, which is not complex. In fact, he reiterates there. So they played like children in the park, quite happy to stay and enjoy and just have fun together. That's what he's saying. Little urge to alter that because they are divinely happy. There is the possibility of love of other selves and service to other selves, but there is the overwhelming awareness of the creator in the self. You see what he's saying? He's painting the picture. This is how we were before the veil. The connection with the creator is that of the umbilical cord. The security is total. Therefore, no love is terribly important, no pain terribly frightening, no effort, therefore, is made to serve for love or to benefit from fear. So here we're having an explanation of the fabled story of the Garden of Eden. This is how it was before the introduction of knowledge of good and evil, which is what happened with the veil. And there's a reference to that later on. So it's interesting how he frames that. That's why they weren't motivated, and that's why a lot of the people stalled for long periods of time in third density. It was fun to have a physical body. There was a lot of things to enjoy here. There was not contention in that as much as very peaceful, loving, divinely happy, right? Everybody knew their connection to God. They all knew their relationship and what the point of it all was. And they were just having a great time. And so then Don says, I don't grasp too well the condition of incarnation at the time between incarnations prior to the veil, in that I do not understand what was the difference other than the manifest of the third density yellow ray body. In other words, right now when we die, we get the veil removed and we start to realize all the things that we agreed that we would do and why we had to learn those things, and we review our life lesson. If you didn't have the veil, how was that any different than just the physical life other than you lost your physical body? That's kind of how he's phrasing this question. Was there any mental difference upon what we call death? Was there any, I don't see the necessity for what we call a review of the incarnation if the consciousness was uninterrupted? Could you clear that point up for me? So he's asking about what we understand now is there's a review, a very important to go through the lessons you've learned, to process any pain or any baggage, and to kind of prepare for the next course, if you like, or the next level of evolution. Was that the same before the veil? As Don's summary, is my summary of his question. Ras says, no portion of the creator audits the course. What an interesting statement. No portion of the creator audits the course, to use your experiential terms. Each incarnation is intended to be a course in the creator knowing itself. So he's using very strongly the analogy of going to school. No one goes to school and just audits the class for fun. You're enrolled in the class and you're expected to make a progressive grade, right? A review, or shall we say, to continue the metaphor, each test is an integral portion of the process of the creator knowing itself. So the review, even though they didn't have to go through the waking up when they die and realizing the whole big picture like we do because of the veil, they already knew the big picture. They still had to review the test results. It's a big part of the creator knowing itself. Each incarnation will end with such a test. So to Ra's point of view, the review at the end is like the test. How did you do in the class, right? Like the final exam in university test for each semester of a class. This is so that the portion of the creator may assimilate the experiences in yellow ray, physical third density, may evaluate the biases gained, and may then choose either by means of automatically provided aid or by the self the conditions of the next incarnation. So that's his answer to that. That's very similar to still how it is, except we have the great surprise of waking up when we die. It's like you wake up to the reality of, oh, that's what was going on. I was in that simulation. Yeah, you start to remember all your past lives and all your lessons, and it all starts to sort of come together. Whereas for them, it wasn't so much that, but they still went back and took the final exam and reviewed the course materials that they'd gone through, what they did well on, what they didn't. So motivation was the big issue before the veil. And the purpose of the veil was to try and change that problem of people getting stuck in just playing around. Questions about that?
Nope, all good.
Okay, great. So here we go then, graduation. So let's talk about what happens with that. So Don asked, okay, then, so still on 82. This is the central important point. It seems to me that if the polarization was the obvious thing, that more effort would have been put forward to polarize. Before the veil, there was an awareness of the need for polarization towards service to others in third density by all entities. So they knew about what was required to graduate, just like when you go to university, you know what you have to do to earn the degree, right? It was like that. It was an open book, well, an open system, if you like. So service to others in third density by all entities, they were aware of it, whether incarnate in third density, yellow ray bodies, or whether in between incarnations. So that's what we just talked about. I assume that the condition of which we earlier spoke, the one of wealth, you might say, was present through the entire spectrum of experience, whether it be between incarnations or during incarnations, and the entities just simply could not, laughing, get up the desire to manifest the desire to create this polarization necessary for graduation. Is that correct? So yeah, you begin to grasp the situation. It was too much fun, and there wasn't a lot of problems or issues that motivated people to change. People were very stuck in a comfort zone that was very enjoyable. Why would you screw that up? Why would you change? It was like everybody's living wealthy and happy and harmoniously. So what are you going to strive for? You've already feeling like this feeling was they've already accomplished bliss in a sense. So Raj says, you begin to grasp. Is there a question?
Yes, there is a question. Catherine?
Thank you, Lee. Thank you, Scott. Real quick question. Who is the test for? Is us, or you mentioned something about creator needed to know something?
Well, it depends on how far down the rabbit hole we want to go, but the big answer is there's only one being. But the test is for our separate self identity to progress towards knowing the one being. And the one being learns through our experience and knows itself through our experience. So it has a requirement of, I want to experience up to this level of experiential thing of what am I like in that situation. And there's a sort of a plethora of things that they want to make sure they experience there. And if the test is, have you experienced all those yet or not? If not, go back and keep going. It's kind of how it goes. But there's only one being coming to know itself. It comes to know itself through us. There's some really good Rupert material on identifying that, and I think I shared some of that with Lee, and maybe we'll listen to some of that at a later time, maybe this month. That frames what is the one being doing with these separate individuals learning this. What's going on is. Rupert has a very good way of explaining that, but that's essentially the answer. Did I confuse you more, or did I help with that?
Well, I'm coming from the point of view of the omniscience and omnipotence of the creator. who knows all, sees all, does all, from that perspective. So there's really no equation for creator to ask questions, because if creator is creator, creator knows all.
Yeah,
And
see,
there's no need for, what do I need to learn of myself? Creator is beyond that. Creator, it's like building a bridge. The architect of the bridge knows every aspect of the bridge that there is to be known.
I understand that question, but I would like to ask you to think about it from this point of view. The law of one never describes the creator as all knowing, all whatever. They describe the creator as infinite with all possibilities, but it's infinite potential. It's not infinite realized yet. And so we're realizing the potential through experience.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Terrific. Awesome. Thank you.
So we go on. We good? Yeah. Ra says, so you're going to go situation. Let us, we already said that, don't we? Let us continue the metaphor of the schooling by considering the scholar as being an entity in your younger years of the schooling process. So here you have someone that's a scholar, but when he or she was very young, right, in the schooling process, the entity is fed, clothed, and protected, regardless of whether or not the schoolwork is accomplished. Therefore, the entity does not do the homework, but rather enjoys playtime, mealtime, and vacation. So there, rather again getting that metaphor of we just had a lot of good fun and didn't do the schoolwork. We didn't put forth the effort. It is not until there is a reason to wish to excel that most entities will attempt to excel. What a very profound statement. And that's the bottom line right there. The veil gave us that reason. We are now in darkness and didn't understand. It also created a lot of other scenarios that we deal with in third density, but that was one of the reasons the veil came about, because we were a scholar that never became the scholar because they just played around in school. They didn't put forth the work, is kind of Ra's metaphor. Don asks, you stated in a much earlier session that it is necessary to polarize anything more than 50% service to self to be harvestable fourth density positive. Was this condition the same at the time before the veiling, the same percentage or portion? He says, well, that's not easy to answer, for the concept of service to self did not hold sway previous to what we have been calling the veiling experience. So there you go. There wasn't a self-serving polarity. There wasn't a negative path. There were no evil bastards that evolved out of this, from the sense that they chose selfishness enough that they polarized that way. That wasn't, there was only one path forward, and it was the positive path. The veil, therefore, introduced that service to self path. It's also, remember, if you remember, the service to self path is only temporary because it becomes assumed back into the service to others path in sixth density. It lasts for millions of years. After third density, it goes fourth, fifth, and then the lower part of sixth, but then it goes away. So it's like a sidetrack path, not a very pleasant one, but it's an option that was created by the veil. A very interesting nuance to that there. So what didn't happen, what we're calling the veiling process, the necessity for graduation to fourth density is an ability to use, welcome, and enjoy a certain intensity of the white light of the one infinite creator. So very important nuances and deep stuff in there. Fourth density graduation is the ability to use, welcome, and enjoy a level of intensity of the white light of the one infinite creator in your own terms, at your own space-time nexus. This ability may be measured by your previously stated percentages of service. So that's what those percentages of service are really measuring. How much of the intensity of the white light are you able to assimilate and use, right? That's what graduation is really about. It's all about growing into levels of light. We are light beings. He goes on, prior to the veil process, the measurement would be that of an entity walking up a set of your stairs, each of which was imbued with a certain quality of light. Each step, in other words. The stair upon which an entity stopped would be either third density light or fourth density light. Between the two stairs lies the threshold. To cross the threshold is difficult. There is a resistance at the edge, shall we say, of each density. So it's a very interesting insight into how the creation is set up for how you graduate, right? There's a resistance at the edge of each density. The faculty of faith or will needed to be understood, nourished, and developed in order to have an entity which seeks past the boundary of third density. So one of the key learning lessons that we acquire in third density is the faculty of faith and will. Now you can imagine that that was much less needed or drawn upon when you weren't veiled. Veiling us puts us in a very powerful position of requiring to live by faith, because in the veil, it's like we're walking around in darkness, banging into things, trying to figure out what the hell's going on. Whereas when you didn't, and so you have to have faith that when you're being guided, you're not being guided off a cliff or guided into danger or harm, but you're being guided in a way that would benefit you. And you learn to trust that, right? And that's part of what we do in penetrating the veil now. Before the veil, you had a very clear idea. And there was nuances to that, but it was much more less required. So there was one of the reasons why they progressed so slowly before the veil. The faculty of faithful will, which was needed to be understood and nourished and developed in order to have the entity which seeks past the boundary of the third density to progress, in other words, and go to graduation. Those entities which do not do their homework, be they ever so amiable, shall not cross, right? There's no free ride. There's no audit. You don't get a honorary degree. You've got to do the work. It was this situation which faced the Logi, the sons, the beginning or the initial creator son, prior to the veiling process being introduced into the experiential continuum of third density. So that was the problem they were trying to solve, right? So to know and understand the answer of why the veil, we first needed to understand the context of what were they trying to solve if they introduced the veil, if it wasn't always there. What was the problem? And this is his description of the problem they were trying to solve. Questions about that?
Nope.
Okay, great. So now we look at how it impacted free will as well. So we've looked at the veil created a bifurcation of paths, a positive service to others, which was always the main path, and then a sidetrack path, service to self. So it created an opportunity for people to choose selfishness by putting them in the veil state. And that's one of the outcomes. But it also created a great deal of motivation and a great drawing upon needing to use faith, which was one of the developmental necessities for graduation to the fourth density. Free will, though, let's see about how that played out. So now we're into 77. So we're going to stay in 77 for quite a few slides, and they'll progressively go through this. This is quite a conversation that Don has with Ra, all about this concept of the veil and free will. So Don says, now, would it be possible for this work of our density to be performed if all of the sublogo, in other words, the sublogos are the non-central sun. The central sun is the logo or logi. The sublogi are suns like ours. So our sun is called a sublogi. And just as by note, we are called sublogi. Interesting, right? So the logi is the central sun. The sublogi are the other suns in the galaxy. The sublogi are third density or entities like we are. That's the nomenclature they use, I guess, in Ra's lingo in eternity. Choose the same polar. Say, let's go back to say, this work in our density to perform if all of the sublogi suns chose the same polarity in any particular expression or evolution of a logos creation. Let us make the assumption that our sun created nothing but, through the first distortion meaning free will, that's what he's meaning there was no product except positive polarity, which is how it was kind of set up. Would work then be done in fourth density and higher as a function only of this positive polarization, evolving from our original creation of the sublogos or our sun? So it's a bit of a confusing question. Let's see how Ra teases it apart. Elements of this query illustrate the reason I was unable to answer your previous question without knowledge of the logi or the logos involved. Every logos had their own nuance of choice of how they would set it up. So when he's asking a specific question and didn't identify what logos he's referring to, I really couldn't answer it because it wasn't always the same. There was enough nuanced differences that he didn't want to misrepresent. But now he's asked about our specific sun, so he can answer that. To turn to your question, there were logi which chose to set the plan of the activation of mind, body, spirit complexes through each true color body without recourse to the prior application of free will. So there were some, he probably shouldn't have used the word complexes there, and sometimes he puts that in there, I think by accident, because this was before the veil. And he's saying that there were some suns that set it up that the individual entities, human type entities, that could progress each true color body without resource to the prior application of free will, without the opportunity to choose completely openly. It was a bit more predestined, and he's going to get into that. It was, to our knowledge, only in an absence of free will that the conditions of which you speak obtain. In such a procession of densities, you find an extraordinary long, as you measure time, third density, and likewise in fourth density. So it took forever for them to get through third and fourth density, which again was the problem they were trying to solve. Then as the entities began to see the creator, there is a very rapid, as you measure time, progression towards the eighth density. So once they got through fourth and fifth, because it's the density of wisdom, they progress very quickly, sixth very quickly, seventh, no problem, and on to the next octave, which is what eighth density is. This is due to the fact that one who knows not cares not. So they didn't know what they were missing out on in third and fourth density so much. They didn't know what was the opportunity in the higher vibrations until they started to get into the octave of wisdom, which is fifth density. Then they started to want it. That was the motivation then. Then they were motivated to study, if you like, to try harder. Before then, they weren't. They just kind of learned stuff if they wanted to as they went along, rather laissez-faire kind of approach to the educational process. So again, that was what was happening. Even though their curriculum was predestined, they didn't have as much choice into what options they had of their experience before the veil was put in. It was kind of like a preset curriculum like we have in universities now. If you want a degree in, I don't know, psychology or physics, there's certain required things that you must take. It's predestined. There's maybe some optional ones that you can take as well, but there's the core curriculum, and that's kind of, I think, how he's explaining it there. So he goes on, let us illustrate by observing the related harmony and unchanging quality of existence in one of your, as you may call it, primitive tribes. So let's look at a primitive tribe living in harmony with quite a good quality of existence. The entities or people in those tribes have the concept of law, of lawful and taboo, things that are, this is what we allow, or this is good behavior, taboo, these are things we avoid. We don't do these things, right? So he's using that terminology, sort of describing a primitive tribe in that sense. But the law is inexorable, and all events occur as predestined. So the law of how things will happen is set, locked in. There is no concept of right or wrong, good or bad, right? You just do what you do. It is a culture in monochrome. In this context, you may see the one you call Lucifer as the true light bringer. Remember, the term Lucifer actually means light bearer or bringer. Okay. So again, a different nuance or concept onto some of these theological individuals or entities that we have a lot of different sort of belief systems built up about. I'm giving you what the Law of One is saying about this as kind of a introduction into a different version of the story of the Garden of Eden and the fall, in a sense. So the one you call Lucifer as the true light bringer, in that the knowledge of good and evil both precipitated the mind, body, spirits of this logo from the here he is using it, Edenic conditions of constant contentment, but also provided the impetus to move, to work, and to learn. So there's one of the benefits of the veil, was it created a impetus to move, work, and learn, rather than just live in the bliss of the garden state, and learn good and evil. Whereas prior to that, there wasn't, right? The description of this hypothetical primitive tribe was a description of the Edenic state, where there's taboo things, don't eat of the fruit, but, do whatever else you want, kind of thing. And, you just gotta have fun and, have a good time. Whereas then it became a situation where there was knowledge of good and evil, and you can start to choose how you want to experience life amongst those. So he goes on, those logi, whose creations have been set up without free will, have not, in the feeling of most logi or other creative sons, given the creator the quality and variety of experience of itself as have those logi which incorporated free will as paramount. Incorporation of free will is essentially a function of the veil. There's a timing of those. So he's saying that those who chose not to do that initially realized, or were looked at as, you're not giving the creator its full variety of experience of self as those that are giving free will. So what essentially happened is free will was passed from the creator to the logi, from the logi to the sub-logi, so central sun to the other sons, but the other sons didn't pass it on to the third density humans as much. There was, and he's going to talk about why in a minute. The why is it, the reason they didn't is it just didn't dawn on them to do it initially. Okay, which is kind of interesting. So it's again, it's showing you that the eternities was set up with, let's learn by doing, and let's figure it out as we go along, rather than an all-knowing being knowing the exact perfect way to do it. That's not the scenario the Law of One points out. It's we're evolving our knowledge by experience, and when they had first set it up, they realized their experience was, this is taking way too long. What can we do about it? Let's give them free will and veil them and see how that motivates them. And that seemed to fix the problem. Okay. Questions about that?
Yes, Francis.
Oh, thanks, Lee. Thanks, Scott. I was just wondering about the planets that are orbiting, like, for instance, our sun and other suns as well. Would they be classified as being representative of the chakras of the sun?
Yeah, it's a good question. They're certainly looked at as living entities and beings, just as the sun is. And they may well be aspects of that. There's a very deep metaphysical connection with the planets. Specifically, we know about in our one. That's why there's astrology and stuff. It very much looks at those linkages and their impact, their energy impact on your own personality and persona as a sublunar guy, as a human when you're born into it. So it's a good way of looking at it. He doesn't go into that as far as I remember specifically like that, but there's certainly an opening that's very likely to be a possibility of a way to look at that. Yeah.
Thanks, Scott.
Yeah. I didn't read that last sentence. I mean, thusly you'll find that those loci moving through the timeless state at what you would see as a later space-time. In other words, further out from the center sun, us, in other words, they chose the free will character when elucidating the foundations of each loci. They saw that it was much better to create a scenario in their creation, in their solar system, where free will was passed through. They saw that as a much more rich experience for the creator to have of itself. And so that's become the default norm now, once that realization was come about. I think in the next one he's going to talk about how that was. Let's look at how that was. There's a question.
Yep.
Yeah.
So, Lou?
Yeah, yeah, thanks, Lee. Scott, so then can we see the free will as the element that speed up the process of penetrating the veil?
Yes, very much so.
Okay.
Although there wasn't a veil before, what it does is gives you incentive to want to, because in penetrating the veil, and we'll learn that as we get through this, the penetrating the veil, we start to realize our connection again, and see, instead of seeing ourselves as separate from the creator, that we are an aspect or an expression of the creator and what it's all about. But we have to learn that in third density now, because the veil blocks us from knowing that.
Okay, and then how can we see then the time before the free will? When there was no free will, there was then a time of stagnation, so to speak. It's like
That's exactly right. People got stagnant. There was a little bit of free will because they weren't forced to learn the lessons. They were just given the lessons in the schoolroom, and instead of, like he said, studying the lessons, they went out and played, right? So there was a level of free will, but it wasn't like we have now.
Okay, good. Thanks.
Catherine?
Okay.
Yes, thanks once again, Scott. It's quite enlightening. One very quick question. It's probably yes or no answer. Does the law of one perceive anything about perfection?
It does mention the term, but not in the way that we. Perfection is a judgment of quality, and everybody's perfection is different. It's kind of what it would say. There's standards of level of growth, but there's no like one perfect, because it's like looking for the. It's like in the Last Samurai, he was looking always for the perfect plum blossom, and the realization came to him at the end, they're all perfect. That's kind of, I think, a way the Law of One would describe it.
Lovely. Thank you.
Okay, I'm mindful of time, so I'm trying to move this along a little bit, but do ask your questions, because I'd rather come back and continue it next week if we run out of time. I guess Don's asking again, 77. So he's following on. I guess under the first distortion, it was the free will of the logos, the sons, to choose to evolve without free will. Is this correct? That is correct. Do the sons or logos that have choice, so they have, sorry, do the logos that choose this type of evolution choose both the service to self and service to others path for the different logi, for the different subsons, or do they choose just one path? Those, what you would call early logi, which chose lack of free will foundations, to all extents, with no exception, founded logi of the service to others path. There was no service to self path, is the other way of interpreting that. The, shall we say, saga of polarity, its consequences and limits were unimagined until experienced. Interesting. So think about what we experience in this life as evil. Evil is a manifestation of people choosing service to self to a very high degree. Any evil act can be looked at and understood as a very selfish act by one or group of individuals inflicting their will upon others often. Um, um, the consequences of evil resulted from giving us free will and avail. It was unimagined until experienced. So there was no service or negative polarity even conceived of until they did this veil experiment and saw that, oh, some are choosing that. And they're choosing it enough they actually graduate because their love of self is so deep that they can break through the threshold. Interesting. That was something that they sort of discovered, like you do in an experiment. So then Don says, in other words, you are saying that originally the logos did not choose the free will path, did not choose it simply because they had not conceived of it. And the later logi extended the first distortion, free will, farther down through their evolution, experienced it as an outcrop of growth from that extension of the first distortion, in other words, free choice. Am I correct on that? Yes. So they realized that giving free will to us in third density much more abundantly and much more like they did of how to create and express ourselves was much more beneficial to the growing learning experience. But the consequences were that some people would choose to be very, very selfish to the point that they actually created a negative path or created what we experience here as evil, in a sense, or darkness. The knowledge of good and evil came from free choice and the veil blocking us from our connection with the one infinite creator enough that we would say, well, shit, if I'm on my own, I'm going to do my own damn thing kind of thing. Make sense? Okay. Questions? Moving along.
Yep.
Ask them as they come. Yeah. So investment in polarity. So we're getting close, but I am mindful of the time. Don says, when the Logos designed this particular evolution of experience, it decided to use the system of which we spoke, creating or allowing for polarization through total free will. In our creations, talk about in our sun. How is this different from Logos that does not do this? It seems that the Logos creating the possibility of increasing in vibration through the densities. Let me ask first, how are the densities provided for and set up by the Logos, if you can answer this? Let us observe your second density. So animals and plants. Many come more rapidly to third density than others, not because of an innate efficiency of catalyst, not because they're good or better at growing than others so much, but because of universal opportunities or investments. He's making a reference to another passage where he talks about our pets and how we invest love and individuality in our pets by making them our pets, animals, our pets, that gives them that boost, right? So we invest in second density beings without even knowing many people what they're doing or why. They just love the animals, but teaches them and gives them a boost to be very quickly catalyzed into a third density being. They advance more quickly. So a great way, I think, a lovely way to look at pairs. So then he goes on, in just the same way, those of fourth density may invest in third density, and those of fifth density may invest in fourth density. So maybe a fun way to look at it is fourth density beings outside of the veil and advanced in pure love want to help us and love us and bring us along almost like we do with our dogs and cats and pets, horses, whatever. And it's sort of a similar way. Yet they are doing it with awareness that by investing that kind of effort and serving us in that way, even though they stay behind the veil for the most part, it encourages us and gives us an efficient, a more effective way to catalyze and to progress into evolution or to progress into the next density. When fifth density has been obtained, the process takes upon itself a momentum based upon the characteristics of wisdom when applied to circumstances. So I had reiterated that before, but that's where it says the law of one. Because of wisdom, they start to realize and they're much more motivated to want to strive to move forward. So the law itself then, in these instances, provide investment opportunities if you wish to use that. So we're talking about investment into enabling polarity, okay? And it seems like each density invests somewhat into the lower density, the one just below them, like we do pets, to help them progress to the next one. So then Don asks, in doing this, there was at the center of the galaxy a lack of knowledge of the lack of concept of possibilities of extending the first distortion, free will, so as to allow for what we have experienced as polarity. So there was a lack of our awareness of being able to do that, to extend and improve polarity. Was there any concept of polarity carried through from the previous octave in the sense of service to others or service to self? So from the octave before this octave, remember, octave is not a density, it's a whole series of densities. Did we bring anything in that was, in a sense, about polarity? And then Ra says, there was polarity in the sense of the mover and the moved, rather than service to self, service to others, mover and the moved. Interesting. That's how it was set up originally. There was no polarity in the sense of service to self or service to others. So that's something to ponder on there. There's something in there that I think could be unlocked. Don asks, I am assuming that the central suns of our galaxy and starting the evolutionary process in this galaxy provided for in their plans, the refinement of consciousness through the densities, just as we experience it here. However, they did not conceive of the polarization of consciousness with respect to service to self or service to others. Is that correct? And he says, yes, that's correct. So initially, it was movers and the moved rather than service to self, service to others. This was not very efficient at polarizing because people only, again, had a laissez-faire approach to it. Whereas when it becomes service to self and service to others because of the veil and because of free will, motivation was greatly enhanced. And in fact, now, third density is the shortest density. 75,000 years, unless you repeat it, some do, but 75,000 years is the shortest one. All the other densities are several millions of years. Okay? So it went from being the longest problem one to becoming the most effective and shortest one. That's why, remember, we said 100 times more intense. Third density is 100 times more intense. It's because of the veil. Before the veil, it was not. Questions about that? Okay.
Not, oh,
Okay,
sorry.
so we're at the end.
Sorry,
Go
I
ahead.
couldn't unmute in time. Lou,
Yeah, sorry, it's quite right. Sorry, Scott, can you elaborate on the answer for 7814? There was polarity in the sense of the mover and the moved. Or who is the mover? Who is the moved? How can we understand that?
Yeah, again, think of it as two poles. There were people that would initiate action, and there were people that would be just followers or moved or be those that would just follow along. Maybe another way to look at it. There were individuals who were movers and would inspire others, and then there was others that would just say, "Oh yeah, I like that. I'll go along with him." We see it in our one as well. That was the main cause of polarity. Those who initiated action, movers, and those that just said, I'll go along if I like it. Here, it's more powerful because it's also aligned with service to self. Are the movers doing it to promote themselves? Politicians, by the way, most of them, or is it service to others? Are the movers inspired to help and serve others? Usually, great deal of good charities and service opportunities and all sorts of situations where that opportunity goes up. So that's how I would understand that. Does that help?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks.
Okay,
Ray.
go ahead, Ray.
Hi. Although I was about to ask another question, but the current one, the point low raised, mover and moved, does it also include masters and the other followers? For instance, all these masters.
It probably would. It depends on how far into the dominance individuals that were movers were. A lot of the master slave kind of situation came out of the service to self orientation. Remember, before there was that orientation, we all knew that we were all part of one creator. Just some people were more motivated to do things, and other people just said, "Oh, I'll help you out with that if you want. It's your thing. Yeah, I'll give you a hand with that, or I'll go along with that, or nah, I don't really feel like I'm gonna sit on the beach today." So it wasn't as much of a dominance thing. The dominance of masters and slaves is actually a Orion group concept, and that's how they've tried to set up a lot of our societies in history, with the elitists being the masters and the rest of us in servitude. That is very much a negative, positive polarity outcome, rather than a movers and a move. Although we still see movers and move, and you can see that a lot of those who are master positions try and motivate and move through force and fear those who are under them. So they're still using that concept, but from a service to self, service to others framing, I would see it. Does that help?
Yes, I'm trying. Okay, another main question which I wanted to ask. So, because free will, okay, in previous to this free will, were there beings? What sort of beings? Or they're all sort of different beings like animals or all like, 84,
Yeah.
For instance, in Vedic and all our different scriptures, we have been speaking about or understanding from, as you know, my background. So we have been, these scriptures have been talking about many, it's from many masters language also, 84 millions. And so far as I think, I remember one line somewhere I found that 84 millions. So 32 probably above this on the earth and similarly above below, including insects and etc. Something like that. Anyhow, main is 84 millions of different type of species. So what sort of beings were there before free will? And
Any amount, say the same as there are now, any amount. And are you asking what kind of beings were in third density, like humans?
Yeah.
Were there other
Correct.
types?
Yeah.
Yeah, there are likely to have been, like, Ra's group looked quite different than the humanoid. We are. Well, I think what they do is they look for a second density being that has a good physical makeup to enable a third density experience, and then they genetically kind of alter it a little bit to advance it, and they can do that probably likely with any species they choose. And so it depends on which planet, which species ends up being promoted into third density kind of realm. And there might be planets, likely are, where there's more than one. There could be reptilian types and ape types and even dolphin types or whatever that are all having third density on the same planet. Ra doesn't talk a lot about that. He's not asked about that, but it's certainly implied that we were just chosen because there was a particular ape that was very close to being good, a good
tabernacle, if you like, or vehicle for third density. And so the original group, when they looked at the second density evolution, the apes seemed like the top of the list. They didn't have to choose that; they just did. Other planets might evolve differently. So it could be any number of types of creatures that are third density. And if you listen to Corey Good, his explanations of some of the beings that he's encountered, sounds like they could be almost anything from even insects type creatures.
And then you mentioned initial slide, but I couldn't understand fully. I thought I will raise this. So that means death and incarnations has been always there. As I think long ago in one of your slides you mentioned, your presentation you mentioned.
Yes. It's always part of the process. Even in the higher densities, their body, their physical tabernacle gets to a point where it gets wore out. Some of them are millions of years. Our original lifespan was supposed to be close to 1,000 years. And there's a lot in the law of one as to why it's now down to only about 100. And there's good reasons for that, and it explains that. But originally it was set up that our lifespan would be 1,000 years, and then you die, review, or go through the testing process of reviewing your life, and then reincarnate and continue on. That also happens in fourth, fifth, and sixth density. Seventh density transferring to the next octave, I'm not sure. Ra doesn't talk a lot about the mechanisms there, but it certainly seems like that same reincarnation native process is part of the system of how they move people in and out of densities and in and out of incarnative experiences.
So that means, was there also the concept of karmic karmas? Or the
Yeah,
karmic
absolutely. Because it does, your past life sets up the scenario for the curriculum of this life, right? Yeah, that's quite clear. And what Ra talks about, what happens during reincarnation or in between reincarnations. Yeah.
Okay, so that means there's a direct nexus between the reincarnation and our karmic things, karmic loops.
Yes, because
Perfect.
there's lessons that aren't learned yet that follow you along, and so you come back and you have experience programmed into your curriculum to learn that lesson. And if you don't learn it this time, then next time you come back, there'll be another version of that. It might not be it's probably never the same exact experience, but it's the same kind of lesson. It just might be taught in a different way, and until they find the way that sort of grabs you and you embrace the lesson. Yeah. So Ra talks about it very specifically like it's going to school. It's very much like that. And he even uses those metaphors in the screenshots we've taken. It's quite striking how similar he talks about, especially third density. It's a school curriculum that we need to master to a certain degree to graduate. And it might take many incarnations to do that. Most likely does. Yeah.
That's all for now. Thank you.
So
Thanks, Ray. Lou?
okay.
Yeah, Scott, thanks. Back again. Okay. My question is it out of this polarization between the movers and the ones moved that that results in discernment? And is that part of the penetrating of the veil that we will elaborate further on, or that's my question. As is between movers and the move, there has to be a breakup there.
Yeah. I think the easiest way to answer that is I see discernment really as an expression of faith. It's one of the lessons that are required for us to learn here, is to discern how we want to invest our energy and time, who or what cause or what polarization we want to invest our efforts in, and grow in. And that's part of free will and discernment. But when you do invest in it, when you do discern it, you do it out of faith that will benefit you and benefit others, perhaps, depending on what your motivation is. So I think discernment is one of the core class curriculums that we all have to learn to master to a certain degree here. The veil enables that much more than when there was no veil, because when there was no veil, you could call upon your past history and experiences of knowledge and link in with however you could with the infinite mind. And so there was a lot more knowledge of what really is going on here. Here you have to discern truth and lies much more, right? Because there's a lot of deceptive and misinformation and incorrect concepts. Even if it's not purposeful, there's a lot of concepts that we've built up, belief systems that have nuanced incorrectness in it all through it. Very, very, very much part of what third density experience is. All of that is a result of the veil. In fact, we'll look at that in just a minute as we go through here. This is the final slide. It talks about the 10 things that the veil does for us and gives us, but we'll do that in a minute. So yeah, again, discernment is a key lesson that we have in third density.
Okay. Thanks.
And Ray's got another question. Yeah.
Yes, please, a short one. As you said, discernment is one of the key lessons. And before you said discernment to some extent, what was the line?
Is extension of faith.
Okay, I will come back to the question. Maybe it will help. So discernment vis-a-vis predestined.
Discernment.
Predestined.
I didn't quite hear your question. Discernment with service. What did you say after that?
Predestiny.
For predestiny.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, there's a balance between predestiny and free choice, in that certain curriculums are predestined. Discernment would be one. Learning faith is another. Choosing which polarity you will experience love, service others, or service to self. There's a whole bunch of required curriculum. Some that challenge you to overcome fear. We all have to overcome fear to a certain degree. It's part of a core curriculum. So there's probably a whole core a listing of core curriculums. Discernment seems to be a key one, because there's a lot that we have to put forward into following a path that we discern as desirable. And sometimes we realize, oh, I've made the wrong choice. And then it's up to you to choose out of faith as much as you can. What's the better path to go to now, since this path has led me in a direction I don't like, right? So it's discernment is about making choices based upon insufficient information. Discernment and faith are kind of a product of that. That's at least how I see it anyway.
And can we, just for fun sake, also can we also say, just like university, we have some certain mandatory courses and there are some optional courses.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly how it is. Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Right. Okay.
Okay. This slide I put together kind of as a summary of, I think, what Ra's trying to say, why the veil, what the veil gives and does, and the impact on ourselves personally. So to frame it up is kind of the final slide, and help us then look at moving forward and how do we penetrate the veil. And so each one of these, I think, is well, it speaks for itself, but let's just go through them. The veil separates our conscious and subconscious mind, making us a complex. That's where the word complex came from. Before that, Ra makes it clear that your consciousness directed everything from how often your heart beat, to your blood pressure, to how much pain you felt when you hurt yourself. All of those were, you had conscious control over them. When the veil came in, some of those were relegated to automatic, subconscious, or below your awareness. It doesn't mean that you have no ability to influence that, because we know that some people have developed that ability, but that's kind of one place you can look at where the veil is drawn between what happens in our conscious activity and what happens in our subconscious. And the truth is that we need to invest, or do end up investing, much more in learning to listen and invoke our subconscious abilities, because that's where we're connected to the infinite creator. Consciousness often gets in the way, and we'll look at why in a few others of these. So the veil separates consciousness and subconscious. The veil blocks, in part, our recollection of past life experiences and identities. I say in part because you can pursue and penetrate the veil to start to learn those, but most people come into this life with what the hell's going on idea, rather than a sense of, oh, I've been and done this before, at least a clarity about that. So it blocks that. The veil produces a drive to seek out love light and discover our connection and identity. And so we talked about that. That's the motivator in the veil. Because we don't know we're connected, we want to know what's going on. Am I a separate individual entity? What does it all mean? What happens when you die? All of those kind of things. The veil is what starts to create a desire to want to know that. The veil gives us choices in our seeking of love light between service to self and service to others. We do this by exercising faith, which is trust and will. Trust that the path you're going on and the will to apply yourself on that path, while walking in darkness, right? The darkness is, we just don't know. You're not walking in knowledge here or understanding. You're walking in faith, because we don't know. The veil creates that don't know part. Before the veil, we did know. Now we don't know. So part of the motivating of seeking out, how we seek out love and light. The veil opens two paths and enables quicker polarization into fourth density, the positive and negative path, and the motivation of 100 times more intense. So that's one of the gifts it gives us. That's one of the big problems it was trying to solve. The veil blocks our sense of unity or connectedness to the one creator, giving us a sense of separate self or ego. So that's where the ego mind or the separate self comes from. Without the veil, we did not have that. We did not feel like I'm an individual entity on my own. We felt very much a part of the whole, because we knew that. We had experience to draw upon. We had knowledge of that. Now we don't. So it creates that dilemma of the separate self and the ego, and trying to overcome that. And hence the disciplines that grow up around schooling the ego self, quieting the mind, learning to get through the conscious to the subconscious again. The veil produces our fixation on this illusionary reality, where we lose our awareness of self and as a being, our knowledge of I am, by allowing the finite mind to be distracted by the content of experience. Okay, and that's how it veils us. We're veiled by the content of experience. We're veiled in that we're always distracted by what's going on around us. What are we seeing, feeling, hearing, thinking? What's the experience that's keeping our attention, instead of turning it back and realizing that what's having that experience is the I am. And the I am is our connection through subconscious mind to the infinite creator of which we are a part. So by allowing the finite mind to be distracted by the content of experience, this distraction veils our awareness of abiding in being. Abiding in being is a term that Rupert uses. That is the true enlightened state, where you're abiding constantly in the flow of the eternal now. The I am, we are. Okay, so the veil creates a sense that we're not that, and it creates an opportunity for us to pierce the veil, to come to this awareness, to awaken to this awareness. That awareness was given or is present to all beings that aren't veiled. That's just a given how it is. The only ones that don't know that's how it is are the veiled ones. The veil is semi-permeable. Our seeking in faith allows us to experience that which is normally hidden by the veil, moving from conscious to the subconscious mind. So there the connection. So it's not a brick wall we can't pass. It's just semi-permeable. And as you seek in faith and discipline yourself, you can make it more and more porous, where you have more and more experience through the veil, essentially helping to quiet the conscious mind and learning to listen to the subconscious mind, which we will look at next time in much more detail of the processes for that. The veil creates an experiential reality or an illusion in third density that's 100 times more intense, and thereby motivates growth and learning. So they're one of the reasons, the whole purpose of the veil. And that's one of the reasons why once one son invented the veil concept, or it dawned on them to try it and saw the benefits, all the other sons, says, automatically said, oh, hell yes, let's do that. So they learned it almost instantly together. But there was one that sort of tried it at first, way back when. The veil is a filter of our perception of eternal truth, which trickles through, distorted by our individual perspective. So that's important. Even when we get through the veil, we're still experiencing what we experience from the distortion of our individual perspective. We cannot help but to have that, because we are seeing it through the means of our separate self-identity in this body, with the five senses and the thinking and the sense of time and the process of that. That's all of the part of the program of this part. The part that's you, that is the I am, that is you, that is from the Creator, is experiencing it as from that finite perspective. And the finite perspective, your individual perspective, is a distortion of reality. So as clear as we think we see things, we must open our minds to a point to say, even though I think I understand and see it much clearer now, and feel it and sense it, I know I still have some distortions based upon my individual perspective. The clearer you can pierce the veil, the clearer that you can clean out those distortions, the more fuller eternal truth becomes apparent. So there's the hint of what the next one will be on, is how do we do that? But the veil offers that challenge, and that challenge is what motivates us to go forth. Motivates us to go into what we want to call fourth density or graduation. So there you go. It went over about a half hour. I apologize for that. I want to try and keep them to about an hour the best I can, but it's okay, because I can blame it on the questions, and we encourage questions. Without questions, it's just me blabbering on, and we need to have the questions. So
Yeah, no, that was great, Scott. Thank you.
I didn't
Larry,
realize I turned my camera off.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Scott. Getting late. I'm going to have to sign off shortly. But I just want to say, for the first time, I no longer feel like I want to curse the veil.
Yeah, good on you. Yeah.
I
Thank you
now
for that.
see what a blessing it is. Thank you. I now see the grander purpose of it. And you put another whole spin on this whole concept of, for lack of a better word, novelty, that God wants to experience and create through us in our free will. And wow, you also help to see what a blessing it is to be in this third density, how powerful it is, how intense it is. And thank God it only lasts about 75,000 years, because it is truly heavy going. But the payoffs are incredible. It's like being able to fast track one spiritual growth. If you play your cards right, you can do a lot in this third density.
Yes, that's a great way to look at it. They by putting in the veil, they changed it from being a kind of an albatross, an anchor, a place where people got stuck and bogged down and just sort of played around and didn't really advance much, from that to the exact opposite, to where it's so intense that it's actually traumatizing for many of us.
Well, yeah.
And that's part of what happens during the reincarnation process, is we try and overcome that, but they realize it is quite overwhelming. Yeah.
And it seems so traumatizing that some of us just say, oh no, I'm not coming back. I've had enough of this. But the reality is, I'll bet just about every one of us tonight will want to come back. Will stand in line, wait for the next body, come back this density to be a service to others, because it's not boring. It's exciting. There's so many opportunities to learn, to grow, to fast track others and service to others, that it wouldn't surprise me if many of us can't wait to get a body to come back.
Yeah, I liken it to standing in line at a theme park, right? People, they create these theme parks with all these terrifying rides, and people go on it and scream their heads off and go through all sorts of adrenaline, and they go, "Oh hell, I'm not going to do that again." And then about 5 minutes later, they go, "Let's go stand in line again. I want to do that again." I think that's what third density is like in eternity. It's
Absolutely. And I think once we drop our bodies, we go to their spirit life between lives. We finish the life review. I think at that point on, it's all theoretical, and we're bored. We can't wait till we come back. I think that's where a lot of us are headed, whether we want to realize it or not. We just need enough time and energy to recharge ourselves to get ready for the next incarnation. But yeah, they really laid out the whole purpose of the veil and everything. It just goes to show how much love there is from the one creator God. So much love for all of us.
Yeah.
The whole concept, the whole fabric of light and love permeates everything through all the galaxies, everything. You can feel it, that there's purpose to everything. And that's really exciting.
Yeah, well said, Larry. Thank you. Well said.
And I love that I love that think about have faith. Have faith if you want to look behind the veil, be curious. It's okay if we want to look behind the veil. It's okay if you want to look, have a peek here, whatever, that's all right. And we do. Many of us do.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it drives most people that are spiritual seekers are seeking to penetrate the veil. They want to start to glimpse the eternities of it, experience divinity, and start
Yes.
to relate with that. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
part of
And
the
put the
experience.
pieces together like one big jigsaw puzzle. I mean, I listened to the questions this evening. I think it's easy to get lost in some of the minutiae. And you see the trees, but you can't see the forest. You can see the forest, you can't see the trees. I think we have to be careful we don't get lost in some of the, I don't know how to describe it, bits of what's been presented, and stay focused on the big picture, why we're here and what this is all about.
Yes,
What's really important.
It's a good point, Larry, and that's part of the challenge of the law of one that most people find. It's very dense, and they do jump around quite a bit through it, and so it's fun for me to try and pull out the nuance of the quality of the information that's in there, but you've got to kind of clear the weeds because there's a lot that often you end up going, oh, I have no idea what the hell is he saying there. You've really got to chew on it. Yeah, it's a heavy, thick steak. It's not.
Well,
it's not
I applaud your ability. I applaud your ability to stay present, listen to all the questions, answer them. Although I think some of the questions, with all due respect to everybody, can distract us from actually what we're trying to learn the law of one, seeing the bigger picture and how it pertains to us today. I think some of the minutiae details aren't that important. It's somewhat just, you know what I mean, Scott?
Yeah, but I still encourage them because people need to ask from where they are to move from that point. And without the question, I don't see where they are, and so I see every question as valuable. Yeah.
Yeah, and maybe could be some value towards maybe holding some of the questions to the end and ask them later and just reference like 77.7, reference certain things. And maybe there's more value in asking the questions. And my concern is some of the questions can distract us from the flow of the discussion and the intention of what we're here to learn. That's my concern.
Yeah, there's a risk versus payoff, and we're juggling that. But again, like eternity, they tried it for a little while without the veil, and they said, "Well, let's try something new." We'll just keep going back and forth and see how we can balance that.
Yeah, that's right. In a way, that's a very good example of dealing with the veil, trying to peek behind it, not seeing it. What is the veil? Asking the questions. And well, in a way, that's a good example of real life, real time, what we experienced tonight in tonight's presentation.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
But very, very interesting. And I just applaud your ability to stay present, answer all the questions, relate to the questions, and get us back on track so we don't get lost too much in some of the other details. I think that's really important. And you did it. You did it tonight. Even though we went over longer than what you said, I decided to stay up. I couldn't wait for the last slide, which put so much of it together, which is fantastic.
So I appreciate that. Thanks, Larry. Appreciate it.
I mean, I tell you, your law of one presentations they're like dynamite. I can't wait. I can't wait for them. So thank you for splitting it up and not trying to cover everything over 3 hours.
No, fair enough. I appreciate that too. I realize it's dense and people need to ponder on it. So I think we're going to try to keep them to 1 hour chunks best as we can. I think that's
this next part, talking about the subconscious and how we relate to the conscious subconscious, is vital in terms of manifestation. It's vital in terms of clarity of intention. It's really, really important that we get a grasp of that connection to the conscious subconscious, so we communicate, and that subconscious can bleed through, and we can influence what we want in this lifetime through being very clear about our belief systems, and that we're all on the same page. Subconscious, conscious are all on the same page. So we can actually bring to fruition in this physical realm what we want. And I think that's what you're hinting where we're heading.
Yeah, I'm curious to see where it goes, because I've only begun to sort of piece that together.
Oh God, I can't wait. That's going to be exciting. But hey, thank you very much to you and Lee and everybody. It was great.
Thank you, Larry. Appreciate it.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Good night.
Good night.
Ray.
Hi, a couple of points. First, as Larry said, 100% seconded, and I hope we all are agree on that these are dynamites. It's literally blowing away everything and then clearing up a lot, helping us to clear out so much. It's just like a heavy, heavy duty vacuum pressure. Okay, second thing, although there are many sentences which you mentioned and Larry mentioned, that can we say that just knowing that it is a whale is enough? Or in this birth time, to get graduation, we need to penetrate, or just knowing that this is whale? What is enough? What is the threshold? Like you
Yeah,
mentioned, some people or masters or someone who is trying to penetrate. So can you sum up again, simple words?
the requirement for graduation is 51% choosing to serve others. It's not penetrating the veil. However, most people who are in service like that live from the heart, which is the key to opening those experiences. The heart center then opens the Kundalini, then raises up and opens the third eye, and you'll have experiences through the veil, whether you realize that's what they are or not. Every time you dream, in a sense, it's your subconscious mind trying to guide you and prompt you. Not every dream is that. Some dreams are just, resolving things, but everybody in their life at times experiences dreams that are much more meaningful than just a whatever dream, just a blah blah dream. That this one was like intense and meaningful and beautiful, or scary, or seem instructive in some way. And those dreams are worth noting, because that's one of the ways that the Lord One talks about your higher self has ability to talk to you directly without interfering with your free will, because you wake up and experience it as a dream. And a lot of people just blow it off because it was a dream. Although even when they say they do that, the fact that they're remembering it and pondering on it and wondering about it shows that there's something that went in that shifted something for them. So you don't have to seek to penetrate the veil. That's certainly not a requirement. But often seekers or people who live in love will have those experiences anyway. Yeah.
One more thing which is related. Recently, I heard this Robert Grant, the mathematician and musician. So I heard in a one podcast, Carl Jung said that our life purpose is to go from everything from unconscious or subconscious to conscious about everything. Something like that the quote was. So I was trying to relate that today's presentation. So being conscious that, yes, it is whale, and being conscious about every single thing which we speak, as we discussed many times, karma consists of three things: our thoughts, our words, and our actions. So being conscious about these three steps, which will be also clearing our karmic things, where does it stand, by the way?
I think it's important that we understand that we have a great deal more power and influence in what we do consciously and how we choose to express ourselves, how we think and feel. All of that is very powerful. I think we're much more part of the creative process than we realize. A lot of what's going on subconsciously can inform the conscious. The problem is the conscious mind is hyper analytical, and it's trained in Western society to be so dominant in that we tend to way over emphasize that side instead of just trusting intuition without having to know the why, when, how that the analytical mind wants to know. And so one of the things that a seeker often learns to do is to shut the monkey up, the analytical monkey up, and just go with natural knowing and see what happens. And in that, they start to invest in faith because they don't have to have a logical reason or explanation anymore. They just knew to do that. And there is living in a balance between conscious and subconscious. I think that's beautiful. That's about the best way I can see that harmonic symbiotic relationship needs to be. The conscious mind and there's a lot of good writings on that, and both I forgot his name. The guy who wrote that great book, Not Be Here Now, Be in the Now or whatever. What's his name?
Eckhart Tolle?
Yeah, Eckhart. I'm just sort of reading through some of that book now, and Eckhart has a good way of describing that, how the conscious mind is a tool, and we should use it as a tool, but it's not a tool that you want to use for everything. Not everything is a nail. You don't always use a hammer. Sometimes you need to trust the other aspect of your mind, which actually is much deeper. The conscious mind it's like the whole mind is like an iceberg. The conscious mind is just that little bit that sits up on top that we notice. The rest of it is under the sea, and that's the majority of the mass of it. So the most connected part of you is not readily accessible in your conscious mind. The veil is what separates that on purpose. And as you learn to invest in the porousness of that veil and open it up a little bit and learn to see through the mist and start to understand that I don't need to know what the conscious mind demands. I can trust the nuances in the subconscious or the intuitive, the heart and the gut is really where the subconscious mind manifests much more than in the thought.
Thank you so much. It was beautiful.
Thanks, Ray.